What's up guys, James from Sikky Manufacturing. Today I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step installation process of the Sikky CD009 Swap Shifter on this brand new CD008 Nissan 6-speed transmission. This guide will help make sure that this installation goes smooth and as easy as possible. Let's get started. In order to make this install easy to follow along, we're doing this on the bench on a transmission that's outside of the car, but this installation is doable with the transmission in the car, and most of the time would probably be done that way because typically when you're installing the engine and trans, the shifter is going to get in the way, so you may or may not have to take it off depending on the application and which chassis you're installing it in. But either way, it's doable. I'm going to be showing you a method from outside of the car, which isn't going to change a whole lot if it's in there, but we're going to get started by knocking this roll pin out of the selector shaft that's coming out of this transmission by sliding this boot up to expose the roll pin. You want to use a punch to knock it out. Let's do that next. All right, so if you're doing this install in the car, you're going to be driving the roll pin up this way from the bottom. Since we're accessing it from out of the car, we're going to do it from the top, but it goes either way. All right, so now that we have the pin out, we can slide the selector shaft back and remove it from the end of the transmission. All right, so now we're gonna remove these 4 12mm bolts that are holding this factory shifter on. Now we can get the factory shifter out of our way. So your Sikky shifter will come assembled just like this. The only thing we really got to take apart to get it installed on the transmission is going to be these 4 Allen bolts on the bottom that remove this cap and allow us to get access to the piece that we will be installing on the selector shaft of the transmission using the provided roll pin. All right, so we're going to start by removing these 4 Allen bolts. When you put these back on towards the end of the installation, you're going to make sure you use some thread locker, which we do provide. Now you can see we've separated the lower piece of the shaft from the upper. Now you're going to carefully disassemble this part, taking note of how it goes together. We've got the boot as well as this steel plate that holds the boot down, so you're going to pull that out. And now we're ready to install this on the selector shaft. All right, so this is what the part looks like that you're going to be installing on the shaft. So the hole is going to be going in towards the transmission, and you line it up with the hole that goes through the selector shaft, and that's where we're going to drive the roll pin through. Again, you can do it from the top or the bottom depending on how you're doing the install. All right, so we're going to line this up and get the roll pin started. Once they get going, it gets a little bit easier. You just kind of, as you start to get in there, you want to wiggle and make sure you're engaging in the hole. You can see now it won't spin. You don't want to be just beating it into the side of the shaft. So just in the beginning, go kind of easy with it. And once it's in there, it starts to lock in, and then you can drive it in the rest of the way. And once you're flush, you're good to go. All right, so this is where the install is going to vary depending on which generation of CD009 or Nissan 6-speed transmission you're running. In our case, we have the late model, meaning the most recent version. This is brand new from Nissan. You can buy them today under the name of CD008. Similar, same kind of bolt setup as a JK or 400Z or whatever the transmission is coming out of, but it's going to be your newer version. The easiest way to identify it is these rear holes here. So as you can see, these holes are direct threads right up the top. There's a small chamfer and then it goes right into threads. The older style is going to have a counterbore, meaning there's a bigger drilled out area that drops down in, and then the threads start. So I'll do a close-up here so you can see what the late model version looks like. All right, so as you can see, there's no counterbore here. It's just a small chamfer, it goes right to threads. So that signifies a later model or newer version. It's very important that you identify which transmission you have and you use the spacers in the appropriate manner. The shifter itself will not function properly unless you get these spacers right. So if for some reason you do it wrong and you get it together and anything doesn't feel smooth, you pretty much, the only thing you could have done at that point is got the spacer orientation wrong. It's somewhat obvious, but if you've never done it before, it might be hard to identify. So just make sure you check out our website. We have a document that shows you the difference in the transmissions and the correct orientation of the spacers. As you can see in your hardware setup for the shifter, there's going to be 4 spacers. These thin ones only have 1 hole in them, whereas these larger ones have double holes. So depending on the transmission you have will determine where these go. So the big ones always go into the bottom of the shifter no matter which transmission you have. The only difference is what hole you're using. So for the late model, we're actually going to be running on the back hole, meaning they're going to be oriented where this hole here is lined up like that. And then in the bottom of this actually goes this other spacer. So this particular transmission, we're running the back hole with the spacers stacked. So your late model, newer transmission is going to run in this orientation. Whereas the older transmission, you're actually going to run in the front hole on the top here, and then this spacer actually goes in between the steel bracket on the bottom of the shifter here and the transmission, sandwiched between the steel and that. And the same thing, that's going to be in the front hole. So this is spun around, and this piece here actually sits down into the steel bracket and locates it. So you're going to run front hole on the older transmission, back hole on the new transmission with these guys stacked. So, but since this is a newer transmission, we're going to go ahead and put these on in that fashion. I'll show you how that goes together. In case you guys have the older transmission, since we're not going to cover that here, I do want to show you exactly how this goes together with the older transmission. So like I said, you're going to run the front hole. So this bracket, or the spacer I should say, drops into the steel bracket like that. So you're actually splitting the 2 spacers on the older transmissions, running it in the front hole orientation on the transmission. So if this was the right transmission, this would slide on and these 2 would be sandwiched between. It's possible to get it together with the wrong spacer orientation, but what happens is the shifter will hit the body of the transmission and you won't have the right alignment at the back here. So if you feel anything weird, you most likely got this wrong, because that's about the only way that's going to happen. So either way, be real careful you get your orientation right. In our case, we are going with the newer setup, meaning this newer transmission gets mounted. So we're utilizing the rear hole of the spacer. We're going to sandwich this one on it, orienting this hole to line up with the back side of the spacer. I'm going to put that in there, pinch that one, drop this other guy in. Same thing, we're running the back hole, so we're going to spin this around towards the back hole, pinch both of these together. I'm going to flip it over. I like to set it down on top of the transmission, and you just slightly push down and it slides right on. And then you're going to look down through the holes, make sure you're aligning through the back hole. Again, late model transmission, we're running the back hole. Early model, you'll run on the fronts. So now we're aligned, now we can run the hardware through and tighten that up. All right, as you can see on this particular transmission, this dust shield is on here where it comes around the drive shaft yoke, typically on the stock Z. Most swap applications where you're running this transmission, the drive shaft is typically going to be 3.5 inch and it may be running a 1350 U-joint in the front, which typically the 1350 is going to interfere with this because it's a much larger, beefier U-joint than the factory Nissan. So you simply knock this off. Also, if you're doing this install with a transmission in the car, this is going to get in your way because you have to run the bolt through the bottom. You probably won't have enough room to access it from the top. In this particular install, being on the bench, we're going to run the bolt down through the top and put the nut on the bottom. It doesn't matter which way you do it, depending on which application you're setting this up on, you can do whatever works easier for you in that situation. Just a note though, We will be leaving it on here because there's no need to knock it off, but it does pop off and back on quite easily. So even if you wanted to put back on, but you're installing in the car, you can knock it off, put your hardware through the bottom, pop it back on when you're done the installation. So pretty basic, but I did want to note that for you guys out there if you're wondering if this is going to interfere with anything or not. It doesn't affect the shifter. You can run it and not have an issue as long as your drive shaft clearances are proper. All right, so now it's time to get these bolts started. So we're gonna put the bolt in through the top like I explained. We're running down through the back hole in the shifter plate into the transmission, and it will thread into the transmission through the bottom of the transmission, through the steel bracket, and then we can install the nut. So we're gonna do that on both sides, and then we're gonna tighten it up. And these are nylon lock nuts to help ensure that this does not come loose on you going down the road. So again, since these are threaded into the transmission, these will tighten up. And once you start tightening the nut, you probably will have to put a wrench back on it, because once you get to the point where the nut's getting tight, it'll try to unthread this bolt. So but you can start off just snugging these up directly in the transmission, and then get your nut threaded on to the point where it starts to get tight. And then these can be cranked down pretty hard. So this bolt can be torqued to 20 foot-pounds on both the top and the nut on the bottom, or vice versa, depending on which way the hardware is installed. All right, so next step, you can see I rolled this transmission over so we can access this. We're gonna put the boot back on. We provide a tube of silicone lubricant, so it helps if you put a little bit on this smaller hole here, and you're literally just gonna stretch it up and over this post, rotate a little, make sure it's not folded over, and then you're good to move on to the next step with that installed. All right, so next step, we have this billet retaining cap that goes back on, as well as the sheet metal piece here, which is what actually holds the boot down into this slot here. So you're gonna wanna get this started next. Just tuck the boot through and get that on the back side located in this orientation. Next step, you're gonna take the provided lubricant that will come in a little clear tube, and you can squirt a liberal amount into the bottom of this. It just provides a little extra lubricant. There's a self-lubricating bushing in here, but a little extra never hurt. So you're gonna line this up. Make sure the boot seats in this groove properly around the outside here. You're gonna press this up on. Get that boot seated in there. And then lastly, we're gonna start the hardware once that's in place. It'll pop in and locate inside the billet piece. So once it's all sitting flush, you know you're in the right spot. Like that, nice and flat. We're gonna start our hardware. Be careful to make sure your threads are good and aligned, and thread in by hand before you start to put any tools on them. All right, get them all snugged up, and then we're gonna torque them to spec. Now the shifter is going to come with some blue Loctite. You're going to want to make sure that all 4 of these get a liberal amount of this Loctite installed. It will make it more difficult if you ever have to take it apart, but you certainly don't want these to back out and fall off while you're driving down the road. So it's important you get the blue Loctite on there when you're doing the installation. All right, so last step, you're going to want to make sure you torque these to 60 inch-pounds. All right, and that completes that part. Using this Octagon system here, you can adapt this 1-inch offset, 2-inch offset, 3-inch offset, using this clamp system to attach the shift rod. You can also adapt to this 2-bolt style, which accepts all the other Sikky rods for other transmissions, like this 6-inch straight, this 8-inch 1.5-inch kinked. We got this 6-inch 2.5-inch kinked, and an 8-inch straight. So these are 3/8/16. Lots of options, lots of things to make this transmission and shifter install go super easy. So we'll probably develop some more of these options for you in the near future as we see and hear from our customers that other needs are out there. So we're always developing more rods to make this as easy as possible to adapt to whatever setup you're trying to run. So here's a quick explanation of how these offsets work, make it real simple. So you basically bolt this on like this, and then this will move in 8 different positions all the way around. Let's say you want to get in between this position and this position for whatever reason. You just flip the rod over and it goes in between those. So you get quite a few options. You can really dial this into exactly where you want it, and it makes the flexibility of the shifter amazing, like nothing else there on the market. You can get real creative. And obviously this comes in a 3, 2, and 1-inch option. All right, so next step, I'm gonna walk you through putting our shift lever and our 1-inch offset on, just to show you how all that works. So depending on which way you wanna go, in this case, I'm gonna go straight forward. So you wanna find the appropriate side that gets you that straight angle. But before you put this on there, it makes it easy. Once you determine it's going like that, then you take your shift lever and drop that in, and you can remove it and start your hardware, which is going to thread into the bottom here. Now I would note, recommend using this blue Loctite when you're selling this. Again, this comes with your shifter. When you're checking out online for the shifter, you will need to decide which lever and offset options you want. If you're going to go straight off the top, offset 1, 2, 3-inch, or adapt to a different shift lever. Either way, we've got you covered on all the adapters, but you're going to need to figure that out before you check out and order. Easiest thing to do if the trans is already in the car is to measure from some known point on the transmission, either the shifter holes here or even the bell housing or the face of the bell housing, to this location or wherever you want to come up. And then you can compare that to the drawings that are on the website, on the listing for this item, and see what measurement you're working with and where you need to end up. But either way, we're going to torque, put the Loctite on here and torque this to 25 foot-pounds. And then same thing, you're going to install this that way. Start your bolt, again, put Loctite on it. We're going to thread this down. These are 7/32 Allen bits, just so you know. And we're going to do 25 foot-pounds. And there you go. Now your shifter is functioning, ready to go. All right, so just a note, the reverse lockout system on the shifter is gonna come preset. So what happens is when you're going to put it into 5th gear, it should touch and lightly drag, but still allowed to go into the gear. For some reason, your transmission's a little worn out. It's possible you may need to adjust this, but highly unlikely. If you do, it's as simple as cracking this loose, taking an Allen wrench and putting it in the end here, and turning this over till you get that just slight touch. And if you notice, when you want to put it in reverse, it drops down, goes over, and then back into reverse. So this reverse lockout over here keeps you ever from worrying about hitting that when you're going for fifth or sixth. Push down, back, goes right into reverse. So it should be easy to go on fifth and sixth. For some reason you feel like you're not and this is hitting, then you do make a slight adjustment, but it should be good to go, set from Sikky when you get it. Well, that's going to wrap up the installation guide for the Sikky CD009 Swap Shifter. As you can see, really quite simple. Shouldn't have any trouble doing it. If for some reason you do, you can always reach out to us, sales@sikky.com, or give us a ring. We're happy to help. If you need help picking out which offsets and which shift levers you need to run, check out the website for a lot of information on that, or as always, get in touch with us and we're happy to help guide you in the right direction to make your swap of your Nissan 6-speed a breeze. So more information, check out sikky.com. Get in touch with one of our knowledgeable sales reps today. Thanks.